Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to today's bonus upload. Before we jump on into it, couple quick links. As many of you may know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. These audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click the bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? Today's upload is a documented research expedition in West Virginia. It happened in the month of June, year unknown. It was decided by the group that I belong to that we were going to hold a Bigfoot research investigation at a location in West Virginia. After going through all of the planning, we set out on this expedition. An interesting note is there was very little information or background history shared about this locale. Being that I was relatively new to the concept of expeditions and researching in other locations, I didn't question this. But as time progressed, I became more curious about the events of what may have caused this location to be chosen for this expedition. I asked what the history was and was met with silence and very little information. We left and headed to West Virginia. The drive out was pretty uneventful, but the scenery was beautiful. It became more scenic the closer we got to the Smoky Mountains. We arrived at the host's home and went through the introductions and last-minute preparations before heading to the campsite. It was decided that I was going to ride out to the camp with the host's wife. I didn't find it too outlandish and opted to go with the flow. During the quiet ride to camp, I got curious and asked her the question that I had previously gotten little information on. What is the history of this place? She began to tell me a few stories that were a little bit unsettling. In the first account, she relayed that a couple from out of state had pulled their travel trailer into the campground and had some strange things happen during their short stay. She relayed that the couple heard strange sounds at night and on occasion would see and hear movement around their trailer at night. Now on the last day they were there, she relayed that the wife had gotten up that morning and began cleaning. She started washing dishes in the sink, and during that, something frightening to her took place. She was standing there washing, and movement outside the window caught her attention. She looked up and was face to face with a Bigfoot-like creature. She became very frightened and began to yell. The yelling scared the creature off and woke her husband up. They packed up their camp and left later that morning. The second story that she relayed was a bit more concerning than the first. She told me about a high school-aged kid who had gotten into an argument with his parents and decided he was going to run away. He left and no one had any idea where he had gone. After he left, his parents became very concerned due to the concern they had about him possibly harming himself. They contacted law enforcement to report him missing. A search began, and about 2 days later, 2 park rangers happened upon his campsite and vehicle. Upon closer investigation, they found that his tent was down, and at initial glance, looked like he had started breaking down his tent. Everything was there in the campsite except for him. It was later learned that the tent was ripped to shreds, and that there was blood all over it, and his sleeping bag, which was inside of the tent. She then told me that a search ensued in the forest around the area. The boy was never found. Upon hearing this, I immediately was skeptical and thought that the latter story was possibly concocted to invoke fear in this place. At the time, I had never heard of any kind of attack by a cryptid creature and thought the likelihood of it was pretty slim, based how encounters seemed to play out. We arrived at the campsite, and darkness was soon to follow. We set up our tents, set up a fire pit, got everything in order. After we got everything in order, it was well into darkness, and we decided it was time to get something to eat. We gathered around the fire, cooking hot dogs and such. Everyone was done eating, and we gathered around back by the fire and decided to plan for the night. We were sitting there, and I was listening to the discussion. As they were talking, I heard a very low snapping sound coming from across the road. I guess I was the only one who heard it because they kept talking and paid no attention to the direction of the sound. The sound came again in that same general area, and I stopped whoever was talking to let them know that I had heard something coming from the wooded area across the road. Bob grabbed his spotlight and took off across the road. He turned it on once he got into the high foliage and began to pan the light back and forth. He stopped panning the light and was focused on one arrow. He whistled, and I was thinking to myself that he must have spotted a deer moving in the tall weeds. Next thing I know, he calls out to us and says that if we wanted to see one, we better come now and look. The host of the expedition took off running out of the campsite towards Bob. I decided to stay put in the campsite with Steve. Before the host of the expedition could reach the spot where Bob was standing, the panning of the spotlight started. I assumed that he couldn't see the creature any longer and was looking for where it had gone. When all of a sudden I saw something in the ambient light behind the tree. As the spotlight panned closer to this thing, I could make out a clear, large, humanoid silhouette. As the light got closer to it, I watched this thing jump from behind the tree to the side of the tree. I stood there looking at it, and 3 thoughts entered my mind. Those were, it's huge, it's close, and don't do anything to piss it off. Steve was standing at a slight different angle than me, and when the creature jumped from behind the tree, he could see the light hit its eyes. I don't know much about Steve, but later found out that when he was a kid, a Bigfoot-like creature would visit him at night and peer through his window of his bedroom. It terrified him. In an instant, he was taken back to that memory. He began to seriously freak out, and I could hear him loudly saying something about the creature. I thought that something was maybe attacking him, and I turned to see what was going on. He began walking in circles in the campsite, rambling about that creature, this, that creature from that. There was some expletives as well. Steve was a big guy, and the level that he was shaken up concerned me a little. I walked over to him and asked if he was okay. After about 30 minutes of hyperventilating, he seemed to calm down a little. Bob and the host came back to the campsite and asked if everything was okay. Shortly thereafter, we found out that when Bob had crossed the road and gone into the weeds, that he caught a smaller, younger-looking Bigfoot in his spotlight that was crouched down on the trail that had been worn through the dense foliage. He related that he had whistled to try to get our attention without yelling and scaring the creature away. When he whistled, the creature looked at him, looked at a circus that was unfolding in the campsite, and wheeled around and headed back up the trail away from Bob. The conversation that took place before Bigfoot came into the area was that the host and Bob talked about driving up and down the roads to see if they could find anything. There wasn't any real clarification as to what Steve and I were going to do while they were riding around. I told them that I was going to stay at camp with Steve because of the level of him being upset concerned me. I actually thought he could have a heart attack. We waited around camp for a while for it to get late before they went out for their ride around the roads. While we were waiting, we could hear owls hooting up the mountainside in the area where the road went. All of a sudden, we heard a loud snap and a crashing sound. We didn't know what it was, but assumed that it was a Bigfoot breaking a tree. The other option was a tree just fell over and made the crashing sound. We didn't know what it was. Bob and the host decided to head out at around midnight. They left Steve and I at camp, and we just hung out and talked. That's when Steve told me about what happened to him when he was a kid, I had no idea, but understood from what he was telling me why he reacted the way he did. I felt bad for him and had no idea what it was like to try to cope with something like that. Steve also relayed the myriad of health problems that he was having, and that's when I found out that he used portable oxygen. He told me he was going to sit in his car, put his portable oxygen on, and see if that helped him calm down. He told me I could sit in the passenger seat if I wanted, and I agreed, so we started talking. We sat there talking and looking at the two lanterns hanging from the trees and hoping that nothing came into the campsite while we were there. A short time later, we both passed out. Next thing I remember, I'm waking up to the sound of a vehicle driving into the campground. It's pitch black dark as best as I can tell. So I figured Bob and the host had been gone for a while. Bob pulled into the campsite, and when they got out of his truck, I could hear him talking. And then, as I sat up a little, I could see them looking at the lanterns and saying something about them. I couldn't quite make it out. I figured the lanterns had run out of fuel, and they were trying to get them relit. They lit the lanterns and got ready to bed down for what was left of the night. I laid my head back on the headrest and fell back to sleep. The next morning we got up and everyone was going through their own morning routines. I happened to think about them coming back into camp and asked what they were talking about when they came back. Bob relayed that when they pulled into the campsite, it looked like the lanterns had run out of fuel. He said that when they got out of the truck and went and checked on them, they found they weren't out of fuel. They'd actually been turned down. They figured that we had turned them down before falling asleep in the car. I relayed to him that when we fell asleep, the lanterns were burning bright, and that neither of us had turned them down. How lanterns got turned down was a mystery. The only thing I know for a fact was that there was no other campers in the campground, and we heard no vehicles come in while they were gone. I have no idea how they got turned down, and I can't say that a Bigfoot came into camp and did it because I didn't see it for myself. One thing I'm glad of is that if it was a Bigfoot, that I didn't see it come into the camp and do it. Bob and the host relayed that they didn't find anything on the road, other than when they went up the side of the mountain, there was a pretty good-sized pine tree that had been broken over and fell into the road and blocked the way. Bob said he was creeped out when he got out of the truck to move the tree. He moved it and they went on their way. That morning after we talked about the lantern, the host relayed that he had to go back to his house, got into his car and left. He tried to start the vehicle, but for some reason it wouldn't start. Bob offered to drive him back, and they asked if I minded keeping an eye on camp. Steve was going to follow them out to the main road and begin his trip to Indiana. I felt good and had no inkling of reservation about staying at the camp by myself. I was armed, and it was daytime. What could possibly go wrong? I had no idea that this day would be one that is etched into my mind forever. Not just that, it formed a lot of my research quirks that I still have today. There are things I do and things I don't do because of this day. I agreed to stay in camp and get things in order for Roger's arrival later that day. They got their stuff together and left. Bob, Steve, and the host had departed, and I was there in the campsite by myself. I was there with nothing and no one. There was a vehicle there, but it wouldn't start, and I assumed it was locked. I didn't really care too much about this situation because I was armed, and I had been all over the world in some of the most inhospitable places. I proceeded with my original plan for the day. Everything seemed fine, and I decided that I was going to straighten up, round up any garbage, and get firewood moved closer to the pit. As I was working, I noticed that the cicadas were making their noises, and they were extremely loud. They don't come but every so years, and I learned that this was this year. They were so loud that it almost affected my ability to hear. I tried to put the very annoying sound out of my mind and continued to clean up the campsite. I'd been working for a short time when a pickup truck came down the side of the mountain. I figured it was someone checking on the campground and didn't pay too much attention until I saw a theme park. They parked in the area where I couldn't see the vehicle, and I heard them get out of the truck. Next thing, I see them walking through the brush along the creek that flowed into the river, and they disappeared. They went the same direction that the Bigfoot had retreated to that night before. They weren't gone long before I saw them walking back along the same path they had taken. I didn't know what to make of this, but I assumed they might have been checking on a trout line, or something like that. I did make a mental note of it because I had been warned before the expedition that the host had a history of possibly hoaxing evidence. I stuck that in the back of my mind and never mentioned it to anyone. They got in their truck and left. I continued rearranging and cleaning up the campsite. About 20 minutes went by and I heard another vehicle coming down the side of the mountain. The vehicle was a small station wagon with what looked like a husband, wife, and 2 smaller kids in the back seat. The kids were on the windows looking out like they were waiting to see something with excited fashion. They drove down the road, took a right-hand fork on the road, crossed the bridge, drove down a short distance before they turned around. They came back over the bridge, went back up the mountain, never stopped as they left. I didn't think anything of that and continued what I was doing. A considerable amount of time had passed, and I would say it was about an hour. I was just about to finish getting the camp in order when I happened to look across the grown field that was on the west side of the campground. I noticed a tree moving, and at first glance I didn't really think much of it at all. I looked again and realized that none of the other trees were moving. It was just one tree that was swaying back and forth. I looked in the direction of the tree and tried to see what was making this tree sway like that. A thought entered my mind. Bear. A bear was scratching his back on the tree, making it move. There was one problem, though, and that was that I could not see anything around the tree that would cause it to move. Then another thought entered my mind. It could be a Bigfoot making the tree move like that. I looked and could see nothing but the tree swaying back and forth in a steady, intentional way. The cicadas were singing loudly as the tree continued to sway back and forth in a slow, steady motion. I decided I was going to act as if I didn't see it. Every now and then I'd glance over to still see the tree moving. Back and forth, I began to ponder what was going on. Was something trying to get me to go over there and investigate? If that was the case, I was surely not going to do that while I was there by myself. Then another thought entered my mind, a diversion, a way to keep me focused on one area while something passed behind me. Then the thought of possible ambush entered my mind. Knowing that I couldn't hear due to the loudness of the cicadas, it would be easy for something to sneak up on me without me hearing it. Now I got extremely paranoid and began scanning visually 360 degrees around me. There was nothing that I could readily see, but the tree kept swaying. Was this all in my head? I can assure you that the fear was just as real as the lone tree swaying back and forth. After 30 minutes of scanning the area like a paranoid person, I heard a sound above the cicadas. It was a vehicle, and I soon saw it coming down the mountain. I was never so relieved to see a vehicle, and my hope was that it was Bob and the host returning back to camp. It turned out it was not. It was a middle-aged couple in a pickup truck. They entered the campground road and drove along the lower road, stopped right next to the camp. The man rolled down his window and asked me if it was safe to swim down at the boat launch. I related that I was unaware if it was safe or not, but my friend that lived in the area would soon be back, and he would surely know. He thanked me, and they continued to drive down to the boat launch. I lost track and momentarily forgot about the swaying tree. I was just glad that I was not alone at the campsite, if but for a short time. The couple drove down to the boat ramp, stayed for a few minutes, then came back up and headed back up the mountain. As I ascended the road, I glanced in the direction of the tree and noticed that it had stopped swaying back and forth. I felt a bit more at ease, sat down in the camp chair for a break, sat there for maybe 10-15 minutes, heard a sound coming from the tall grass just across the campground. I looked in the direction of the sound and saw Mama Groundhog and her baby emerge from the tall grass. She came out onto the road, baby in tow, and grumbled with every step as they headed right down the center of the camp road. I thought this was kind of funny because she actually sounded like she was pissed about something. The thought then entered my mind that maybe they were flushed out of their hiding place in the tall grass by whatever had been moving the tree back and forth. The groundhogs left the area, and I never saw them again after that. Shortly after the groundhogs left, a truck pulling a fifth-wheel camper pulled into the campground. The driver headed toward the campsites that were closer to the boat launch. After a short time, I could hear sounds of them setting up their campsite. I continued my wait, and after about 30 minutes, Bob and the host showed back to camp. As soon as they got out of the truck, I went up to the host and told them that I didn't care what was going on or who was going where or when. They were not leaving me alone in camp by myself again. He immediately started taking jabs at me and telling me that there was no reason to act that way, and he wanted to know why I was acting the way I was. He decided that we should go for a walk and talk. We walked down the road, and I explained what happened. When we approached the area where the fifth-wheel camper set up, they had set their camp up in a nice fashion, and even had a rubberized padding set down in front of their camper that would provide clear, non-dusty place for them to walk. I noticed 3 kids running and playing around the camper. We waved at the campers as we walked by and continued around the loop. Not far from the fifth-wheeled camper, we could see an extension cord cross the road. We looked, and we could see that a generator had been set up a good distance away from the camper on the other side of the road. The walk continued. We got to the place on the road that was closest to the swaying tree. I took the host over and showed him the tree, and we both examined it. Putting my hand out to push on the tree, I quickly learned that it was very stout, and that it took quite a bit of force to make a tree sway like that. It was earlier that day. We then walked back to the campsite and proceeded to talk about plans for the rest of the day. Looking back, I know that my paranoia was pretty much self-induced, but I believe my spidey radar going off like that played a part of it as well. I had not had a bad feeling about the place until that day. The fact remains that something was making the tree sway, and I could not see what was doing it. I'm not going to say it was a Bigfoot or any other cryptid for that matter. I knew at that point only that there were Bigfoot in the area because I had seen one that night before. After thinking about the events of the day, I made a few decisions that I would change how I operate when it comes to research expeditions. The first thing I swore I would never do again is ride or travel to the expedition location without having my own vehicle. The second is that if I am out researching with someone that I do not know and trust, I won't be getting out of the vehicle. Some may call the latter being scared or chicken, but I can assure you that being locked out of a vehicle by someone is not what you want to have happen when cryptids start coming out of the woodwork. These are also things to consider if you're researching with someone who is green or that has never had any kind of encounter. That afternoon, Roger and his girlfriend and child showed up to camp. Roger wanted to go walking and explore the area, and I wanted to do the same, but hadn't had a chance to just do that yet. He and I took off walking and looking around the immediate area. We ventured down to the creek bed and located a large pile of fish bones. It was mainly heads, bones, dried skin. It looked like someone had taken hundreds of fish a short distance up the creek, filleted them, and threw the carcasses into a pile. The odd thing was that this pile was surrounded by tall weeds that you really couldn't see it unless you were standing in the creek bed. We poked around the area for a bit and walked down toward the bridge. I was walking much slower and looking for evidence while Roger walked faster. He was under the bridge and continued down the creek bed to the river. I had walked 30 or so yards down the creek bed before he called out to me, "Come look at this." I walked under the bridge and headed in his direction. There was a flat rock ledge where 3 turkey feathers pointed in different directions, with a rock on top of them to hold them down. Neither of us had seen anything like this before, but We're sure that this find was purposely placed there. Roger took pictures of the find and we continued to look around the area. There were no other finds until we went back under the bridge on our way out. As we got under the bridge, on one side you could see a hole that had been dug out under the roadbed. This hole was roughly big enough for the average-sized man to get into, if he went feet first. There was nothing inside of the hole, but we could clearly see that something had disturbed the dirt inside the hole. We looked around for anything of note. There was nothing else to note. Took pictures, headed back to the campsite. We helped Roger get his tent set up, and then we gathered around the fire pit to eat. It was getting later in the evening, and we decided we were going to hang around the camp that night and catch up and share experiences. Soon it started getting dark. The twilight approached. I could see the man from the fifth wheel camper walking up the hill toward his generator. He went out of sight, and shortly thereafter I could hear the generator running. I didn't think too much of it and continued to talk to the guys. Some time had went by. It was getting dark, and we decided it was time to light the lanterns. After they were lit, we continued to talk, and I happened to look down toward the fifth wheel camper. I could see that there were so many lights on, and the area around the camper was lit up very brightly. I remember thinking to myself that it sure seemed like an awful lot of light for a camping trip. I didn't pay it any attention for a while. It continued to get darker, and we continued to nurse our fire. I happened to glance down toward the bright light of the camper to see them all go out at once, and to not hear the generator running. A few seconds go by, and I see a flashlight making its way to the generator. A few seconds go by, and the droning of the generator resumes. I could see the flashlight making its way back to the campsite, which was now well lit, like it was prior to the generator going off. I didn't think much of this event at the time, because I assumed the generator went off due to running out of fluid, or overload from the draw from the very bright lights. I continued talking with the guys and didn't think anything else about it. About 15 minutes go by, and I hear a drone of the generator stop again. I look in the direction of the camp, and it's dark. The flashlight makes its way to the generator. The droning sound starts again, and the lights are back on. This seems curious to me, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I'm very intrigued to watch the series of events unfold for 2 more times. The 5th time it happens, I see a flashlight make its way to the generator, and then back to the campsite. It wasn't 10 minutes later I saw headlights coming from the direction of the fifth wheel camper. I watched as the campers drove out of the campground in what seemed to be a hurry, trailer in tow. They drove up the mountain road and were never seen again. We were all talking about how fast they left and determined that they must have had something happen for them to leave like that. We would never find out. About 30 minutes later, a pickup truck comes down off the mountain road and turns onto the lower road that passes right by our campsite. The truck is occupied by a younger guy driving and a younger female passenger. There was also a younger guy and girl in the back of the truck as well. They passed by and went down to one of the campsites. That was almost out of view. They parked, and we could see flashlights and hear them talking. We could see them piling up wood, dragging logs from a wooded area and put them in a pile. We didn't pay them any kind of mind and figured they were just out there to drink some beer and smoke some weed. After a little bit, we could see that they had started a fire in the distant campsite. I noticed that the 2 young couples had started a very large bonfire. I figured they were there to have a good time and hang out. I turned my attention back to the guys, and we continued to talk. A short time passed, and I happened to glance in the direction of the large fire. I could see the shape of someone running around or jumping over the fire. I thought that was odd and wanted to see what was going on. I remember that I had a pair of binoculars in my pack, so I got them to take a look at what was going on. I did not expect to see what I saw that night, though the view through the binoculars was not great. I could see one of the guys frantically running around the fire. At first, I couldn't tell, but eventually could see that he was butt naked. Next, I could see the 2 young ladies down on their knees and facing away from the fire. They also looked to be naked as well. I remember thinking to myself, what the hell is going on? That's when I saw a dark figure step forward from out of the shadows and into the light of the fire. It was one of those guys. He was dressed in a long black cape and was wearing a horned devil mask on his face. I remember thinking to myself that I was about to see someone get killed. But I continued to watch. The cape man stepped forward and raised his hands in the air like he was going to say something. The guy running around the fire seemed to go into a berserk state, writhe his arms as he ran around the fire in a hunched fashion. The cape man stepped forward in front of one of the girls, and she began to perform a sexual act on him. I remember saying, what the hell is going on? The guys in my camp became interested and wanted to take a look, so I gave them my binoculars. By the time everyone had gotten a look, the small group had put out their fire, and we could see their headlights coming towards us on the upper road. They passed, went out the mountain, and were never seen again. I know this doesn't have anything to do with the Bigfoot research, but wanted to include it because I want to be as unfiltered as possible. Needless to say, it creeped me out even more than I was from the events that had happened earlier that day. Something did not feel right, and I'll admit that I was a little bit shocked up by everything that had already happened. The host had been unable to determine why his car would not start, but had scheduled a tow to come get his vehicle on the day that the expedition was over. I asked if it would be okay for me to sleep in the back seat. He said it'd be fine. I told Bob that he could use my tent for the night, and he said that he appreciated it. His plan was to sleep in the back of his truck. At least if he used my tent, he would be able to stretch out and get some halfway decent rest. We continued to hang out near the fire and talk, and started to hear owls calling in the distance. The guys kept saying that the owl calls didn't sound right, but to me it sounded like a normal owl. The only thing I could tell was that the calls would come from one direction, and then after a few moments, they would come from another. Not something terribly concerning due to the fact that owls could fly from one location to the other and call once they reached that location. It made sense to me. We listened to them for a good while, and then the calls stopped. It got time for everyone to bed down, and everyone retreated to their tents. I took my sleeping bag and crawled in the back of the car. I locked the doors, curled up, and went to sleep. After a while, I woke up and was really hot. I rolled down the window about an inch to let some fresh air in, and my hope was that it would stay cool and cool the car down. I fell back to sleep. I don't know how long I was asleep for, but I was awakened by a sound outside of the car. I lied there, covered up in the sleeping bag, and pulled it over my head. I wasn't sure what the sound was that woke me up, but passed it off initially as nothing and tried to go back to sleep when all of a sudden I heard a loud and a low, guttural, inhaling sound coming from the area of the cracked window. I lay there as still as I could, and I didn't move an inch. And inside of me, I was freaking out. I continue to lay there, listening. I hear nothing after that. After a while, I fall back to sleep. The next morning, when I got up and got around, Bob was sitting at the campfire drinking coffee. I walked up to him and was trying to get fully awake when he asked me if I got up during the night. I told him that I had not, and he told me that he was asleep in his tent and was awakened by someone or something moving around the camp. He told me that he thought it was me because whoever was walking up to where the pack was and was rummaging around in it. I instantly became concerned. I knew that my pistol was in my pack. I looked into my pack and learned that everything was still there. I was the only one that was armed in the camp, and no one knew that I had my pistol. I wanted to make sure that no one had taken it. I was relieved to find it was still there. And there you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed today's bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that helps this channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and our friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.